Hey, my friends, welcome to today's episode. I'm so honored to have Cathy Heller with us. Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
Now, I've been trying to think like, how in the world am I going to get all the questions that I have for you in just 30 minutes? Because not only is your story so cool, but I love your heart and passion
Oh,
for helping
thank you.
people find their purpose, and calling and purpose and all of that is it's my jam. That's my language, and a lot of people don't believe in it, but there's a army of people who do and who want to pull that out of others, and you're one of those people.
Yeah.
You started off, correct me if I'm wrong, in the music industry. You're a musician.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a
So
songwriter.
I would love
Yeah.
to hear a little bit of background about that.
When I was growing up, music was the thing that kind of made me feel more okay. Everyone has their thing, and I wanted to grow up and do something with that. But I think as children, sometimes we don't see possibility. We only see like, well, our parents are doing this for a career, and maybe there's one creative person who's, a friend whose father works in advertising. So you think, oh, I guess if I'm going to be creative, maybe I could do marketing. Like that's maybe all you know. And all I knew was that if you wanted to do anything with music, maybe you'd be like a famous rock star. Like I didn't know any other way. So I came out to LA looking for a record deal in 2004, and I got signed by a label actually a couple of years after, which was cool. But then I got dropped from the label, which they didn't, that happens a lot. And then I gave it up and I started to get like a bunch of day jobs, and I worked in a casting office. I worked in a real estate office. I worked in a nonprofit, and I was just like, oh man, I just don't feel like myself. And so I did that thing where I just knew I couldn't spend another day not being myself. And it was scary, but I quit my job and I was like, there's got to be another way to do music. And I wound up finding a way. I wound up writing music for TV shows like One Tree Hill and Switched at Birth and Criminal Minds and Younger, and then commercials like McDonald's and Kellogg's and Walmart and Hasbro and Disney. And it was amazing. And I started making like $300,000 a year writing music. And I was like, wow, this is so fulfilling. And I did that for 10 years and I was really happy. And I was like, wow, I'm able to make like the kind of salary a lawyer makes having fun. And I was able to have kids. But then I wanted the next frontier. I think as humans, we're very growth oriented. We want to be growing. We want to be in a state of progress. And so after 10 years, I felt like I was ready for the next thing. And I got led to helping other artists figure out how they could be songwriters, which led me to helping all kinds of creatives, which led me to starting a podcast. And the podcast it just took off, and I couldn't believe it. Yeah, I think we're not at 3 years yet, but we've just hit 10 million downloads.
So cool.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that words from the heart really speak to the heart.
Yeah.
And I also think that people are really feeling invisible, and everyone has this thing, this little voice inside of them saying, I know there's more to me, and I really want to be more of myself. And so my show really explores like, what are those things that you could just do and life just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Cathy, your story of, you wanted to do this and it wasn't working out, and so you went and got a job. That's, man, I've heard that a lot. I've experienced it myself. But what was interesting about your story is you didn't just keep going down that path. You shifted and you figured out a way. And I was just wondering, like, in that gap, in that space between, this isn't working and success, where most people just say, well, this is my life, the life of an artist, the life of a creative isn't going to pay, and this is just the way it is, and it's too hard, this wasn't meant to be, et cetera, et cetera. When you were in that space, what shifted in you and what was different that pushed you into keep trying where most people give up?
Well, I think sometimes when the pain of staying where we are is bigger than the pain of failing, then we move into action. And My parents are not happy. My mom and dad got divorced when I was little, and my mom has been really depressed, struggling with suicide, struggling with so much. She barely leaves the house. And my dad's on his third marriage, and they don't feel fulfilled. And I just looked at that and I said, that's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
That cannot be me. And so I just pushed, I just leaned into like, this is life or death. Like I refuse to do it that way. Every day is a gift and I don't want to be miserable. And so I just pushed forward. And I feel like we all have a tremendous amount of self-doubt. And what I've learned doing my show, interviewing so many successful people, I've realized that what successful people have in common is they're also scared. They don't know if they're going to be met with rejection. They're not perfect when they begin, but they do it anyway. They do it while they're scared. They have the courage to start. And I think that what really comes up for me is that, and one of the things that I realize is just so essential to this entire thing is we have to give ourselves grace.
Mm-hmm.
We have to give ourselves permission to make mediocre things, to be messy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as children, we've all been through so many wounds and so much rejection and so much pain. We just we make walls around our heart because the pain has been so great. But when we risk putting our truth in the world, so you risk being hurt. But if you allow yourself to just not be perfect and be messy, you will eventually make really brilliant things.
Word. That's so good. I wasn't going to go in this direction, but you talked about being, a child and experiencing that. And I can really resonate. And I think one of the things about being a parent I always say it's like the most awesome thing and also the most terrifying thing coupled together, but figuring out how we can kind of nurture that freedom, that messy creation within our kids.
Yeah.
And still prepare them for rejection.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it's so important. I mean, the truth is that everyone's broken, and that's what makes us all beautiful. There's a custom in Japan when a vase breaks and they put it back together. You've seen this? Everyone's seen this now. Yeah. When they put it back together, if a plate or a vase, if it breaks, actually, they showed this in Mary Poppins Returns. Anyone who saw that movie, they show the same thing. What they do is wherever it was broken, they emboss it with gold so that they believe that it gives it more worth and more value. And I think what we don't recognize is that all of us, the little secret that no one's sharing is that we're all struggling with broken parts and scars and so much. And so the world doesn't ask of you to be perfect. The world asks of you to have courage and to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And vulnerability is actually the way that we are loved, right?
Yeah.
So I think I leaned into that early on. And I even do that on my podcast. Like I'll share, that I'm struggling with something and I'm feeling anxious, or I'm struggling with something in my marriage, or and people just go, oh, someone else, someone else who can actually meet me, where we are. So I think if people knew like the way to actually move forward is not to try to curate this perfect false self, but to lean into what really is who I am. And that takes courage. But when we can like drop those walls, it's so much easier than we make it.
Yeah.
Everything just comes together. We work so much harder and it doesn't really work, Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there's so many good things right there. I was wondering about, the decision, and I'm not sure what path led you down to leasing your songs out, but that decision, because I'm sure you had a lot of ideas of different avenues you could take, and podcasting. I mean, deciding on, I'm going to start a podcast and interview
Yeah.
people, and all these ideas and opportunities, and people probably saying, well, hey, Cathy, have you thought of this? You know, and all this stuff's coming up. What's your process for tuning in and listening and making a decision that feels really right for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think whenever someone says, I don't know, I think it's a limiting belief. I think the truth is we always know, but sometimes we just
So good.
don't like what we know. And we're afraid that if we trust what we know, we're going to hurt someone, we're going to let someone down.
Yeah.
Um, and I've definitely wrestled with that. I can definitely be a people pleaser. You know, I'm a recovering codependent, you know, I'm conflict avoidant. I want everyone to be happy, but I know that if I do that, it's not sustainable. And so I can just kind of know when it's something that I want to do for myself, or I'm doing the thing that I quote unquote should do.
Yeah.
You can kind of just tell, you know, your gut knows the way. So I think it's a matter of like, can you take the risk to be true to yourself? And I think that what a lot of this is, you know, people say like, be yourself and become who you are. I think it's a lot of unbecoming. It's just kind of unbecoming who you're not, you know, like so many people I meet. I remember talking to my grandmother before she passed away. She died at 96. She was so awesome. And I was so close to her. I remember saying to her, what would you have done with your life if you could go back? And she said, oh, I would have been a painter. And she said, but my mom and dad told me girls don't go to school past the 8th grade, and you're going to just go get married and have kids. You're not going to be an artist, you know? So she said they gave my brother art lessons, but not me, you know? And I think that the number one regret of the dying that we found out when we talk to people in their last moments is they feel like they didn't live life on their terms. They lived a life that their mother, that their uncle, that their brother told them, this is what we want from you. This is what we expect of you. And so this is such a precious gift to wake up and be given this, you know, air to breathe. So I think we have to take the risk and start doing more of what we love. And what's really cool, Heather, you know, what's really neat is that I have seen my listeners now, you know, like, yes, on my show, we have people like Howard Schultz, who grew up in public housing, who started Starbucks, right? He grew up, there was food delivered to their door. They had nothing. Now he's worth $3.5 billion. You know, we've had dancers, photographers, painters, actors, Jenna Fischer from The Office, the woman who started Jimmy Choo, Tamara Mellon, Bobbi Brown, the makeup artist. Bobbi Brown was a waitress in New York City who decided to make a lipstick. We've had all these creative people. But what's really cool is that not only can we see that it is possible because we get to hear from these people who are now millionaires and billionaires, but the people who've listened to my show have gone and taken steps. And it's just so cool. Like we had this guy in Missouri, Greg Franklin, who was listening to the podcast, and he joined our free Facebook group for the podcast. And he would pop in and tell us about how he hated his job. He was working at a factory and his job was to make plastic bags for dog food. He stood in front of a machine all day long. And after listening to the podcast, he started to just say, like, what do I like? Is there anything in this world? And he started to make cheesecake one day. And the first time he made it, it wasn't really good. And the next day, Facebook gave him another recipe. They were like, oh, I guess you like cheesecake. You know how it does that.
Yeah.
So he did a couple more cheesecakes, and then he just started to make cheesecake, and he started to go into town and like sell a few here and there. And then it just kind of led to eventually he opened up his own cheesecake shop.
Yeah.
And he's so happy. And he's like, Kath, I never knew I could be happy. I think that people have shame. I don't think they believe they deserve to be happy. I think people put their shame on us. I think that adults teach us that happiness is reserved for retirement or for the weekends, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And I think that we think the choice is either to do something we love and starve, or to do something we hate and make money. And I think there's a third choice. I think that there's a way to start to make a living doing something that lights you up and being able to make just as much or more money than you would building someone else's dream.
Yeah.
And that's what my show is about. And that's what my book is about. And it's like, here are the steps to take. And you really can. You can get yourself out of this. This is not the only model for how to live a life.
Where do you see contributions role in that? I know that I think your latest episode is James Wedmore. Love him. We're talking about this, about how, your work actually impacts other people's lives. And sometimes we feel kind of, especially like as creatives and stuff, like, well, is this selfish of me to be pushing and pushing and pushing this one thing without realizing like impact's role and how we can make an influence through our work? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is everything what you just said. I mean, that's the whole ball of wax. Like we've done enough research now to figure out like what makes people happy. And it's actually not happiness. The opposite of depression is not happiness. Yeah. It's purpose. And we are built to serve. Yep. We were put here to help repair this world, and we know it. Mm-hmm. And everybody has something to help make it better. And I remember when I had Daniel Pink on the podcast, and I said to him, because he's really like a legit sort of like, thought leader, and he's written so many amazing books. He has a few very famous TED Talks. So I said to him, what do you think about people putting things in the world and selling stuff, making money, doing what they love? What do you think of that? And he said, if you do something that makes a material difference in the lives of other people, whether you paint something that makes people feel something, or you create a piece of software that helps somebody save time, or anything, he said, I'm sorry. He said, you have a moral obligation to make sure you sell it, because how much more good, how much more can you create? How much more can you serve if you get to make a living from that? So you're not just saving your crumbs of time after work doing that stuff, but you're focusing on it with all your free time. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I feel like this is church right here. Amazing.
I do too. I mean, and I do feel like whoever is the God of your understanding, if you're listening, whatever that means to you, if you call it God, Spirit, Mother Earth, whatever, it's like, we all know that there is something bigger than us. And we are put here to be in partnership with that higher power to make this world better. And so what I've come to learn, we've had Seth Godin on the show, and he's so brilliant. And he's known as like a genius in marketing, but what he really is a human. And that's why he's so good at marketing. And he's so smart. And he said to me, Cathy, he said, you know what business is? He said, when business works, when it's successful, he said, it is radical empathy. Yep. He said, because in order for you to sell something, someone else has to want that or need that. And so the more you sell of something, you've figured out a human being who you are here to serve, and you figured out how to give them what they want and what they need. And when you look at it that way, boy, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
I interviewed him Friday, and I told him the exact same thing. I said, people resonate with you because it's not marketing. You promote humanity and generosity. And I think, Cathy, that's why you've blown up so much. I mean, we always want to go to the tactic side of like, oh, Cathy, well, what did you do? The tactic. And I know there's an element of that, but two, people want so bad to connect, and they want to feel heard, and they want to feel seen. And you've created a space for that, which is just so, so beautiful. And I'm so grateful for you for that.
Thank you. That is so sweet. And that's so cool that you had him on. And that's so kind of you to share all that and reflect all that. And that's why you're so successful, because you really see people, and that's such a gift. That's all people want, is to feel seen. Yes. And to that extent, what I would say is that your greatest asset to your business is you. And so the more you spend time on your own healing, the more you spend time on all the stuff that gets in between you showing up as your authentic self, that is the best thing you can do for your business. And then, of course, there's ways to work smart instead of working hard. Of course, people have figured out, what works and what doesn't, how to send an email, what kind of subject lines actually work. But it really comes down to engagement and connection. And you're not feeding things into a computer. You're talking to human souls. And so I also think people lose sight of like, it doesn't have to be millions of people. We're in this place of like more. I need 50,000 Instagram followers. I need 500,000 YouTube subscribers. It's like, wow, do you know what you can do with a small group of human beings who really feel known and seen by you? Yeah.
That's it.
You can do so much.
That is it. I want to ask this one question from a listener. She wanted to know who your favorite guest has been, or maybe one that's challenged you personally.
Oh my gosh.
I know that's probably insanely hard because you've had the list is insane.
We just had so many good people, but recently we had a songwriter on. Her name is Colby Calais. Do you know who she is?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It starts in my toes and I crinkle my nose wherever it goes. And I love that song. Once I start to sing a song, I'm like, I have to sing the rest of the line.
That's right.
She was on the show and she and I cried together because she shared with me how, she always loved to sing, but when she was in high school, she didn't even really want to be in the play or in the choir because she has so much stage fright.
Yeah.
And her friends put her music on MySpace and it blew up. And then she got a record deal. And then as part of that, she had to perform on these stages at arenas in front of 20, 30,000 people. And she would have panic attacks and she felt so small and she was so scared. And I thanked her because I think it's so easy to look at people who are really successful and say, boy, is she lucky.
Yep.
And we don't recognize the human struggle and how much sacrifice and how much growth it means for her to show up and have to confront, all of that. And so she said, thank you so much for seeing that. She said, nobody really ever gets that. And she really talked about can you imagine if you're an introvert and you're shy and then someone's like, okay, you're going to step out on that stage and you're going to sing for an hour and a half to 20,000 people.
Oh man.
Yeah. And she said, and I worked through it with a therapist and I worked through it with, really close friends. And I had a therapist on tour with me. And she said, and I just did it because I didn't want to let people down. And she said, but I realized that when I would make a mistake or I'd feel scared if I just shared it with the audience, she said, people were so forgiving. She said, and I realized that the vulnerability actually is what saved me, Yeah.
How do you get your guests to feel so comfortable with you? Like, what is your maybe tip for connection? Because
you're so good at it.
You're good at it. I hear you. And I feel like you've mentioned it before. I'm like, I feel like we know each other, even though it's the first time we've met, because you just create such a intimacy and authentic space with your work. And I just love to hear your tips on that.
Thanks.
It cut out.
That's so sweet. I think you're really good at that. I think everything starts with the self. When we're different, everything changes around us. Yeah. And, I think a lot of times we want to make these huge changes. We just want to snap our fingers and we say to ourselves, God, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Whatever it is. And I think people have to recognize it's just a 2-degree shift that you need. Imagine if you had a boat, right? And a boat is like setting sail from its harbor. If you moved the compass on the boat 2 degrees, it would wind up, if you went 100 miles out, 1,000 miles out, those 2 degrees it winds up in a different continent. So it's I think what I do is I try to show up and be really present as much as I can. And it's amazing how when you're coming from a place of truth, people feel safe. And that little shift. Have you ever had that experience where you're talking to someone and you don't know why, you just tell them everything about you? right?
Yeah.
You just feel that there's space. There's a environment that's safe for you to be yourself. And so that's why I think the radical empathy that Seth Godin talks about, it's not just, we have to have radical empathy for other people, but that starts with ourselves. When you have empathy for the fact that you don't have it all together and you can stop working so hard to like earn people's love and stop the false self, just show up. Other people will show up as themselves.
That's it.
Yeah.
Cathy, I have one final question for you, but before we go, first of all, I just want to thank you so much. I know you've been traveling, just taking the time to come and speak with us.
Of course, yeah.
And then just what you're creating in the world and sharing what you've learned and creating such a space, like you just said, for people to feel heard and seen and validated and step into their God-given gifts and abilities.
That's it.
And talents. Oh, like I said, I just feel like I have church when I listen to you. But you have a new book and an amazing podcast. Where can people grab all the news?
Yeah. So, I love podcasts because they're free and you can just gain so much just having, and it's also so intimate listening to something in your earbuds, and anyway, so my podcast is called Don't Keep Your Day Job. You can find it wherever you find shows. And then I have a book that just came out in November, and there's an audio version of it on Audible. There's, the book version on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but it's been just so amazing because when I wrote the book, I thought, I don't know if this is good. I don't know. I could have probably written it better. I guess I'll just have to put it out in the world the way it is. And people have been saying that it's really speaking to them. This one woman, she emailed me. She's like, I was on the subway and by page 14, I was in tears. And she said, you just have a way of just coming, to speak to my heart. And I said, I'm so grateful for that. So this woman wrote to me also, who's a nurse. She said she works with cancer patients. And she said, Cathy, this book is medicine. And that makes me feel so good, So yeah, read the book. You can get it on Audible. And I actually think Audible, if you get a free trial, you can get the book for free.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All that will be linked in the show notes. Please check it out. I promise you will not regret it. Cathy, very last question. I was thinking about that younger Cathy probably felt so defeated, and she just lost this contract, this opportunity, and she was probably thinking, that was it for me. That was my chance, and here she is at these jobs that she doesn't care about, and probably feeling so empty and so alone and so broken.
Yeah.
If you could go back to her back then, before she had tasted all the things that were to come, and tell her one thing, what would that be?
I would say you're worth it and keep going, because there's no way God created someone like you and is not going to make a space for you at the table to be seen and heard. And don't stop fighting until you arrive in a place where you feel visible.
Yeah.
And, it's always a new level of that, right? It's like there's always levels of the onion layers to peel away. And I realized that every movie I've ever seen is about a hero who's a broken character, just like all of us, who's fighting for stepping into their truth, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And there's always tests in the movie, and we kind of know that that's what happens in a movie, but in our own life, we get one hit to the jaw and we go, I'm done.
Yep.
And the reason we love those movies is because that hero, they're broken just like us, but they keep fighting for their truth. They keep fighting to wind up showing up in the world and saying, this is why I came. This is what I'm here for. So don't stop until you get there, and know that you wouldn't have been put here if there wasn't something that you absolutely were here to do, because there never was you and there never will be. And that's just not a nice thing to say. That's just the fact.
That's it.
So I also, by the way, I made a quiz on my website, cathyheller.com. And what's really cool is it gives you some tactics, because I think sometimes people hear me say all these like beautiful big ideas, like, where do I go with it? We made a quiz to help people figure out, like, how might you be able to figure out what you love and how to do it as a career? It's like a career finder, and it like kind of breaks it up into like, can you do this as a maker? Would you be a teacher? Would you be curator? Would you be an investigator? And it kind of breaks down what kind of jobs, what kinds of things are possible. So you guys can go take that for free. It's at cathyheller.com.
I know that is so helpful, because how many people say, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do.
And that's, we reach for the highest branch we can see. And so I want to show people a possibility, because I know once I can show them a trail, then they can go down it. Yeah.
Oh, and you are, Cathy, you are. I'm so honored to have you. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate
Thank you. This was so nice.